it's Roxie with Roxie's Broadway Breakdown. Welcome back to my channel. And so listen up, you fellow thespians that are out there. If you've ever wondered what are the real differences between Broadway, Off-Broadway, Off-Broadway, there are some notable differences, and especially when it comes to actors, you might want to know the differences between getting cast in a Broadway show and an Off-Broadway show or an Off-Broadway show. So first off, Broadway theaters are just bigger. They have to at least seat 500 or more, and they're located on Broadway or in and around the Times Square district. Off-Broadway houses seat at least 100 people to 499 people. And Off-Broadway seat 99 people or less. Now, are there exceptions? Yes. There are exceptions and some overlap. Off-Broadway theaters and Off-Broadway theaters are pretty much any theater located in and around New York City. And they're mostly congregated in Greenwich Village and the West Side. But like I say, this is it's the capacity of the theater and where they're located. Now, as far as the quality of shows, I've seen great Broadway shows. I've seen great Off-Broadway shows. And then I've seen some meh Broadway shows, and I've seen some meh Off-Broadway shows. So, you know, it's not always about the quality of the show. Budgets have a lot to do with it. Now, this is a musical theater channel, so I'm sort of concentrating just on musicals. Broadway musicals have enormous budgets. They are big, they are splashy, they are multi-million-dollar productions. And that's really where you start to notice the biggest difference. What they can do, they have to adhere to Actors Equity Union, so what they can pay their cast and their crew. But because they are so expensive, I mean, probably the average musical, and this is lowballing it, like I would say 10 to 12 million, that's lowballing it because so many of the new musicals have special effects, big sets, big costumes. We're talking maybe 15, 20 million, you know, dollar musicals. They have to maintain a week, you know, per week, probably between 250,000, 500,000 to maintain that musical. And so producers aren't recouping their costs. Now, the average actor may make, depending on your part, about 1,800, 1,900, 2,000 a week, which is great. But that, again, that's depending if you're an ensemble. If you've got a lead, it's much more. You know, it depends. That's fantastic if the show can sustain itself, and if it has longevity. If it doesn't, it doesn't matter, because you're not going to stay, you're not going to get paid, the show's going to close. And that's sort of a shame, because that's what's happening to a lot of Broadway musicals these days. They just don't have the sustaining power like a Phantom that was, you know, on Broadway for 35 years. Chicago's still going strong after decades. So is Lion King, Wicked, even Hamilton has been going for years and years. But those shows are few and far between. There's a lot of new shows that have opened even this past fall and spring that are already closing, and that's a shame. They're really good shows. They're Tony Award winning. They were nominated for Tonys, but they just can't sustain the high ticket prices and these multi-million-dollar budgets because the producers can't recoup their costs and they can't afford to pay cast and crew and these huge, you know, budgets that they went into the show with. So that's kind of problematic. Now, if you're an Off-Broadway show, the budgets were a lot less. They probably had maybe $1 to $2, $3 million budgets. They're smaller houses. So the tickets aren't as expensive, and it probably only takes about 50,000, 100,000, give or take, to maintain the show every week. So you might have luck being on the show a little longer. Your salary's not as high. It's maybe somewhere between 500, 1,000 a week on the average, give or take, and again, depending on your part. Now, a lot of times in off-Broadway shows, it's a launch pad to try to get to Broadway. Now, there's a lot of avenues to try and get, you know, to Broadway. It might be an off-Broadway avenue. It might be a national tour. It might be a show they tried on the West End and they're trying to get it onto Broadway. Sometimes you just get to Broadway if you have really notable producers and they have all kind of networking and, you know, they just get their show onto Broadway. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to get a show onto Broadway. But an off-Broadway production might be one way to get there. So, you know, it's kind of hit or miss with an off-Broadway show. You might have a little longevity. You might not get paid as much. It might be not as prestigious to say, you know, I'm in an off-Broadway show, but, you know, might be some give or take pros and cons there. And then off-Broadway shows, yes, it's, you know, much smaller house. You're playing to less people. Your salary's going to be smaller. But again, you know, you might get to do the show a little longer. And, you know, it just all depends. So there are some real differences broken down if you were ever wondering, well, what is the difference between Broadway, off-Broadway, and such? I hope that helped. I hope that cleared up some things for you as to what all those different terms and definitions are. All right, don't forget to click and subscribe, and I'll see you in my next.